een live gesprek met Edward Snowden voor het eerst in Nederland. And that's why I'm going to switch into English, Mr. Snowden. Mr. Snowden, hi Edward, how are you?
Hello, Amsterdam.
Hans de Zwart, may I ask you to address the prize to Mr. Snowden, please?
Yes. Hello again, and hello, Edward.
Hello.
Every single day, our work at Bits of Freedom is made easier because of what you've done. So it's with great pleasure that I'm here to put the spotlight on somebody with tremendous courage. Somebody who, through a huge personal sacrifice, has deeply impacted the world for the better. Through your resolve to do the morally right thing and not accept that 2 + 2 = 5, you have shown us all the humongous scale and dangers of mass surveillance. With your disclosures, you've single-handedly managed to rejuvenate the global privacy debate. So I'm therefore honored and humbled to award you, Edward Snowden, the Winston Award. May you be an example and inspiration for many others. And can we please give him another round of applause?
Thank you so much.
So, do you maybe have a few words for our audience here in Amsterdam?
I do. First off, I'd love to be there with you tonight, but unfortunately I couldn't make it. I'm still having a little bit of trouble getting a visa. I would say it's an incredible honor, but it's an honor that I wish was not necessary. I wish it was not mine to share, because it's not mine alone. This belongs to a community of individuals and institutions around the world. Journalists, activists, publishers, technologists, everybody who has been seeing the trends building, everybody who has had concerns about the way our society is developing and sought to resist them, sought to challenge them, and said that, yes, we all see the direction that the society is headed in, but this is not ours to have. This is not the way we have to go. And yet, increasingly, we see this is where we are. The challenge that we're facing today is that we have these award ceremonies. We have to recognize individuals who make sacrifices to protect basic rights, basic liberties, basic values that Western society has held dear for generations. And I have to say, I wish I was speaking with you tonight under very different circumstances. Because what we see is within the Netherlands, rather than take lessons from what we've seen over the last year, they're trying to make their laws worse. The MIVD, the AIVD are working together. They're using legal authorities that were championed, they were platformed, they were designed by the National Security Agency. And actually, I mean, this isn't just me saying this, these are things on the record. Upstream is what the program is called in the United States under a particular authority, that they're now trying to apply to you. And people ask, why do these things matter? People go, do I really care? Do I have something to hide? Do I have something to defend? People ask me, how do we explain to people why they should care about this? Because these are questions of rights. These are things that even if they don't apply to you, they apply to all of us. If you give an inch, society loses a mile, because rights are collective. And if you stop defending these things, Everyone loses them, and we will never get them back. And yet we all understand why we need these rights. People say, I don't know what it would be like to live in a society without any privacy. But the inverse is true, actually. We have felt this for ages and ages. Every single individual has lived through these experiences when we were children. Because what you think about in 1984, the thing that Winston was experiencing was the awareness, the prejudice, the prejudgment of knowing that all of his activities were being monitored and they're being analyzed for approval. Are these things that our observers would agree with, or are these things that our observers would wish to discourage? This is the same as our parents looking at us and saying, what should he eat for dinner? What kind of books is he reading? Who is he hanging out with? Is this with the right crowd? Is she developing in the way that I think is appropriate? The problem with the laws that are trying to be passed in the Netherlands today that provide bulk access to the communications of terrestrial cables, vice merely satellite communications, is satellite communications are used mostly by institutions, mostly by large organizations, mostly by governments. The social impact of this interception is much smaller when they provide themselves rather than terrestrial cables, where the majority of internet communications flow, through which the majority of our private records flow. Because what they are providing themselves is unaudited access to the private records of every individual, every citizen's life in the greatest detail. Now, the government might defend this, saying, oh, we're only talking about metadata, but this is not true. Because first off, once you have access to these cables, you have access to both metadata and content. But let's take them at their assertion. Let's say that yes, we have metadata. All we care about is metadata. We're not looking at content. The reality is metadata is a proxy for content. If I, the analyst sitting at NSA in Hawaii, or a government office in Amsterdam, is looking at your communications, I see the IP address that this communication originated at, the destination that it went to, what the port numbers associated with the communications were, the file size, the length and duration of the transmission, where it went through, where it routed to. But this can be applied to a news site, and I can tell exactly what you're reading without seeing the content at all. Because if I know that this IP address is run by the biggest newspaper in the country, and there was an article published on that day of this file size, and that corresponds with what you were looking at, I know what you read without having the content of it at all. And this can be done programmatically, algorithmically, and it gets worse and worse. Ultimately, we have to decide what measure of rights we want to enjoy as a society. And we have to not simply believe in them. We have to not merely speak in favor of them, but we have to actively stand for them. And say that if governments seek to redraw the boundaries around our rights, and they do it in secret without the accountability of the public, that they will no longer remain our government. And if we lose control over the electoral process, if we lose control over the policies of our government, we will build better systems ourselves as individuals, as communities. The kind of things that Aral Bakan was saying. So we won't have to live in a world where we've got a big brother sitting up here in the corner looking at everything we're doing. We have us. We have trusted communications. We have the same rights that we ourselves inherited and that we will pass on to those who come after us. And that through working together, through community leadership, through solidarity, we will say that I don't want to live in a world where everything I do is intercepted in advance. It is collected in aggregate, in bulk. And that when governments make mistakes, they won't be held to account as we see today. We will say that civil society, the public, has a seat at the table of government, and we will steer the direction of society as it heads towards the future. And we will say, these are our rights, and if you will not respect them, we will defend them. Thank you.
Thank you. So Baram, if he sticks to the plan for once, will tell us how we'll run the Q&A in a minute. Yeah. But before he does, I'd like to start off with the following question. So during this evening, we've been talking a lot about the post-Snowden era, which is quite ironic as I'm speaking with you right now. So what do you consider to be the role of Edward Snowden in the post-Snowden era?
First off, I would say it's important to remember that there is no pre and post. There's only one period. And my role, to some extent, when we talk about post-Snowden, we're talking about the end of my active role. My work largely was accomplished as soon as the information that I had discovered, as soon as the information about the serious violations of human rights that I had uncovered was passed to journalists, my role was done. It shifted to the press, to the public, because I didn't want to change society. I didn't want to impose my values on you. I wanted to give us, the public, a chance to decide the kind of world we want to live in, deliberately, democratically, and say, hey, you know, yes, the government may have this interest, it may have that interest, but ultimately these are public decisions. When we talk about the bases of our societies, you know, these are collaborative decisions and they have to work together. The one good thing I will say is that despite the fact that this process started over roughly a year and a half ago now, it's still ongoing. Just a few days ago, we saw the first documented confirmation of a state-sponsored hacking attack that could hold up in court. We have documented evidence of an EU member state using a cyber weapon against another EU member state, the United Kingdom in this example, against Belgium. And this is one of the questions that we talk about in terms of this mass surveillance, in terms of this sort of bulk collection that the Dutch government is now debating passing. What happened in Belgium was the telecommunications provider that serves the entire nation, their safeguards were subverted, granting complete access to a foreign nation to use the records that they were generating, to use the capabilities that they had funded for the use of their citizens. What are we doing if we create systems which are capable of mass surveillance within our countries, and we pass policies that say we won't abuse these, they'll be used appropriately, we'll restrict them, but then other countries can use those same infrastructures not just for their benefit, but against us as societies? The only way to prevent the abuse of this infrastructure, the only way to prevent the abuse of our private records is not to collect them in the first place. We don't need to generate a database of information about the private lives of everyone around the country all the time. And this is what I would say is something I'm focusing increasingly on. How can I help raise awareness about these concerns that politicians don't want to discuss? And what can I contribute to the technical solutions to try to prevent this from being possible, even in the worst and most unaccountable regimes around the world?
Thank you.
Blijf staan maar even staan. Thank you very much, Mr. Snowden. We still have about 10 minutes for a brief Q&A. We asked people to send us their questions, and believe it or not, we got about more than 15 questions, and some of those people are here. So I'm asking, the first question will be about Roger van Vers. Roger, ben je hier? Okay, Roger. Would you please stand up and ask your question?
Hello, Edward. I think that the change we need to save our way of living, our liberties and our privacy is not one that is created with technical solutions. We need a new way to think about privacy, such that we start to value it again. Value it more than convenience and profit. Nobody should want to live without it. I've thought about this a lot and have no answer. Do you know people who have a long-term vision how to do this? How can we reframe the concept of privacy to something that we can't live without?
I would say the main idea here is that the choice of the word privacy to describe what we're discussing is actually a misnomer. It's an inappropriate word. This is often pushed by the government. You know, they label everyone in this room, everyone in society who disagrees with their policies as sort of an advocate of this or an activist of this or that. They say you're a privacy defender, you're a privacy activist. But what we are citizens. And what we're talking about isn't privacy, it's liberty. Because when all of our activities are being monitored, what we're losing is not just privacy, it's freedom, it's choice. Because we can't think independently for ourselves. We can't determine what our feelings really are if we can't talk to friends, if we can't associate without realizing or without conceptualizing that we have a safe space to experiment, to tell people, oh, I think this, and they disagree and say that. If we can't have free and open exchanges, and particularly if we can't decide what our political ideas are, what our political values are, and champion them without being afraid that these are being collected and stored in a database that lasts for 5 years and can be used by police, it can be used by government, it can be used, as in the current Dutch legislation, as sort of a trading card that can be given to foreign nations in exchange for other information. If we have this, what we're really losing is not privacy and is not just liberty, but choice. We're losing the ability to determine for ourselves the kind of things we want to do, the kind of activities we want to participate in, the kind of world we want to live in, because we realize that certain activities, certain things we might want to try out, certain ideas we want to discuss and debate, certain people we may want to associate with, that will have a negative consequence on our private lives. And we have to avoid that.
Thank you very much. Next question. Wow. Susanne Harthold. Susanne, would you please stand up? Thank you.
Thank you. There is a Dutch draft law that aims to introduce a decryption order, an order that forces suspects to decrypt the data on their computers. The reason is that if everybody is going to encrypt data to protect themselves, for example, against our own government, it's hard to catch computer criminals. What do you think about these plans, and do you see a second crypto war coming?
This is a real challenge because we see a lot of governments beginning to think about the compelling decryption. But this is really dangerous. This is probably the worst possible response that governments can take to increased encryption. Because who in this room has ever forgotten a password for a service? You know, you can't remember. You change the password on a Friday and then you come into the office on Monday and you can't remember that password. If that happens to your iPhone, and we have a compelled decryption sort of legal regime in place, you're going to jail because the police won't believe you when you say, I forgot. Moreover, even if you know the password, they're asking you to testify against yourself. They're using your own knowledge, your own awareness of who you are and what you do and what your interests are against you in court. But the burden of proof in any criminal case, the burden of any trial, the entire, all of these extraordinary authorities with which we invest the state to exercise on our behalf, are regulated by the idea that they're difficult to use and they can only be used in extraordinary circumstances. The burden of proof is on the state to prove that you did something wrong, not on you to convict yourself. And ultimately, there are other ways around encryption that are pre-existing. Things can be as simple as the police arrest someone when they are currently logged into a device. They can use targeted exploitation of machines to recover the encryption keys. There are many other possible solutions to the investigative problem that would allow police to retain reasonable powers, but would not require people to become their own enemies in their daily lives. I think that's a dangerous policy and we should avoid it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes. The final question, Robert Brands. Robert, would you please stand up?
Hello. You've done a great job showing the vulnerability of the internet society, but what do you advise us normal people of the internet to do? The minimal things we can do, and to be more aware of our risk of using the internet. More specifically, what can we do to be less vulnerable for the intelligence agencies and know more without needing your brilliance?
First off, I would point out I'm not particularly brilliant. I'm not particularly skilled. I'm not, some extraordinary elite. I didn't graduate from high school. I'm a normal person, just like everybody else in the room. And I think that's the real key thing when we think about the problem and how we address it, is that every one of us, every single person in this room has the power, has the ability to change things. You don't necessarily need specialist knowledge to prevent us reaching a world, prevent us reaching a point in society where we have to hide from intelligence services. We don't need to, and we should not, fear state security bureaus and men with guns and sticks patrolling our streets. We shouldn't have to worry about whether this government in this country is going to kidnap people and torture them and all kinds of other extraordinary things. This is not the basis, the foundation of an ordinary society, and we must not accept it. So I would say, while there are reasonable technical means that everybody can take to improve their protection, one of the biggest ones is hide your information from your internet service provider by using services like Tor, the Tor browser bundle, virtual private networks, although those are not reliable at very high threat levels. They work for ordinary people, at least for keeping things away from your internet service provider. But first and foremost, commit to saying, if you see something wrong in your society, if you see extraordinarily abusive laws and new authorities being debated in Parliament that you think are corrosive for society, do something about it. Don't just talk about it. Don't just talk to your friends, although raising awareness is important. But stand up, go to Parliament, say something about it, and say that if you do not fix this, we will. And as a community, we will take these authorities not just away from you, because we fear the abuse in our own country, but we'll take them away from every government and build an internet ecosystem which can be trusted, which can be reliable, not just for people in Amsterdam, but for people in Beijing, people in Moscow, people in every other country all around the world, in Washington, D.C., in Buenos Aires, everywhere. Because human rights are human rights. They're not national rights. They don't depend on the color of your passport. They depend on the color of your heart. And for all of us, that's the same. So we need to stand up not just for us, but for everyone.
Thank you very much. That was it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.